Story 1. I grew up in a house with a massive, sprawling backyard and thick, suffocating woods behind it. My two older brothers were always into scouting. They knew every knot, every trail, and every sound of the forest. For some reason, I never joined. I remember being so incredibly jealous of their weekend camping trips that one humid summer night, when I was only 9 years old, I begged them to let me camp out in the backyard. I wanted to prove I wasn't a baby. My parents finally gave in, and we set up an old, musty canvas tent near the stone fire pit. The night started fine, with the sound of crickets and the fading warmth of the embers. But around 1 a.m., I woke up to a dead, heavy silence. Even the crickets had stopped. I rolled over, noticing my brother's sleeping bag was flat and empty. I figured he'd just gone inside to use the bathroom or grab a snack. I unzipped the tent just a tiny crack, barely an inch, to peek outside into the darkness. Someone was sitting on the wooden log by the fire pit. At first I thought it was my brother, but the silhouette was all wrong. It was a tall, gaunt man in a long, tattered trench coat that looked like it had been pulled from a grave. He wasn't moving. He was just staring intensely into the cold, gray ashes of the fire. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I froze, slowly zipping the tent back up and crawling deep into my sleeping bag, praying he hadn't seen me. That's when the sound started. Sound of a slow zipper opening. It was an agonizingly slow, rhythmic sound. Someone was unzipping the tent from the outside, 1 inch at a time. I stared at the bottom of the tent, paralyzed. A pale, bloodshot eye was pressed against the small gap, staring directly at me. As my eyes adjusted to the moonlight, I realized the man was smiling. A wide, unnatural grin that showed the glint of his teeth. I didn't think. I just screamed. I screamed until my lungs burned. My dad came charging out of the back door with a heavy flashlight and a baseball bat. But by the time the beam hit the fire pit, the man was gone. There were no footprints, no broken twigs. To this very day, whenever I'm outside after dark, I still feel that cold, predatory eye watching me from the deep shadows of the trees. Story 2. When I was 22, I was desperately looking for cheap, second-hand furniture for my first apartment in a small, isolated coastal town in Maine. I stumbled upon an estate sale ad on Facebook Marketplace for a mansion miles away from the main road, hidden behind a dense tree line. The ad was short, almost urgent. Everything must go. Tonight only. I arrived late in the evening, just as a thick, salty fog started rolling in from the Atlantic. The house was a massive, weathered Victorian structure, beautiful in a decaying sort of way. But it was completely dark. Not a single light was on. A yellow, rain-smudged note was taped to the heavy front door. Doorbell broken. Please come to the back deck. Entrance is open. I felt a wave of unease, but I really needed that furniture. I walked slowly around the side of the house, the sound of the waves crashing violently against the jagged cliffs below. The fog was so thick now, I could barely see my own feet. I reached the back deck and knocked on the heavy glass sliding door, calling out a greeting. No answer. Only the sound of the wind whistling through the porch railings. I stood there for a long minute, the hair on my neck standing up. Then, for some reason, I looked up at the windows of the second floor. My blood turned to ice. Every single window in that massive house now had its blinds wide open. And at every single window, a person was standing. They were perfectly still, like wax figures in a museum. Men, women, even children. All of them staring down at me with the same vacant and terrifying smile. They didn't blink. They didn't move. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted toward my car, nearly tripping in the dark. As I slammed the car into reverse and hit the lights, I saw the man from the ad standing on the front porch. He had his hands in his pockets, his head tilted at an impossible angle, just watching me disappear into the fog. I later found out from a local librarian that the house had been empty for nearly a year after the previous owner was found dead in the basement. Who those people were, or what they wanted with me in the back of that house, I will never know. Story 3. I live in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Pennsylvania with a large, deep in-ground pool in the backyard. My parents were away for a wedding weekend, so I decided to have a few friends over for a small, low-key pool party. It was a good night, but by 1 a.m., the last guest had finally left. I meticulously locked the sliding doors, checked the windows, turned off all the patio lights, and headed upstairs to get some sleep. The house was silent for about 30 minutes. Then, a massive, echoing splash erupted from the backyard. It sounded like someone had done a cannonball into the deep end. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart racing. I crept to my window and looked down. The pool lights were off, but in the moonlight, I saw a man. He was tall, incredibly thin, and he was calmly swimming laps from one end to the other, his strokes perfectly timed and silent. He wasn't one of my friends. I opened the window slightly and yelled, "Who's there? I'm calling the police!" The man stopped mid-stroke. He floated there for a second, then slowly looked up at my window. His face was a blur in the dark, but his movements were terrifyingly deliberate. He climbed out of the pool, and instead of running for the fence, he marched straight toward my back door with a heavy, wet stride. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of the sliding door downstairs being forced open. Sound of a sliding door. I knew I had locked it, but the sound of the latch snapping was clear. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and locked my bedroom door, pushing my desk in front of it. Then came the footsteps. Wet, heavy, rhythmic footsteps on the hardwood floor. Sound of wet footsteps. Squish, squish, squish. He wasn't rushing. He was coming straight for the stairs. He reached my hallway and stopped right outside my door. I could hear the water dripping onto the floor. The handle turned once, then twice, shaking the frame. Then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks that seemed to vibrate through my skull. A deep, raspy voice from the other side whispered my name. "Open the door, Jason. I know you're awake." My heart nearly stopped. How did he know my name? I screamed that the police were already in the driveway. A long, agonizing silence followed. Eventually, I heard the wet footsteps retreating, moving back down the stairs and out the front door, which slammed shut with a bang. When the police arrived minutes later, they found a literal trail of pool water leading from the backyard, up the stairs, right to the spot where he stood outside my door. They never found him. Now, no matter how hot it is, I never go near that pool after the sun goes down.